Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to the latest episode in our new series, Call My Supervisor, the PhD podcast for the School of Politics and Economics at King's College London. In each episode, we'll be speaking to a doctoral candidate from one of our departments to pick their brains about all things PhD, from their research and ideas to their revelations and advice. We hope to offer a platform for those studying with us to showcase their work while offering invaluable insight into what life is like studying to become a doctor. If nothing else, we hope you finish up today having learned something you didn't know when you started it. My name is Daniel Mansfield. I am the Communications Officer for the School of Politics and Economics here at King's, and I'm pleased to introduce you to my co-host for this episode, Tomek Gola, a final year undergraduate studying European politics here at King's. Hi, Tomek.
Hello, everyone.
And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest for this episode, Marypaz Ventura-Arrieta, a doctoral candidate studying with the Department of Political Economy. Welcome, Marypaz.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great, so let's make a start. To kick off, Marypaz, I'm going to ask you to introduce your research. So if you can give us the title and a brief overview.
So the title of my PhD, which I'm not absolutely married to, but it is what it is now, is How Does Policy Discourse Affect Immigrants' Decision-Making? A Mixed Method Analysis. And essentially, this is going a little bit backwards, but I think it always helps to know a little bit of my background before I kind of talk about the research. I used to work in Chicago in the US as a coordinator and legal assistant at the National Immigrant Justice Center. And so when I was there, I kind of saw, it was during the Trump administration, so there was constant policy changes happening. And I saw how they were happening, how they were affecting immigrants, and then how the media was portraying them and kind of how immigrants were looking at the media and just kind of this whole thing. So that got me thinking about the way that media covers immigration policy changes and the effect that that might have on immigrants' decisions to apply to immigration applications or not. And so that's looking at immigrants in the United States who are residing there already, be it undocumented or they have certain status, then they want to apply for citizenship and things like that. But essentially, they're interacting with the immigration system within the country and kind of looking at how media coverage might affect their decision to interact with the system or not.
Can you tell us then a little bit more about what your research will be looking at?
Yes, so I'm going to be looking at the United States. So my research is kind of limited to US immigration. I'm going to be looking at kind of US TV media coverage of immigration policy changes during the last 3 administrations, data permitting. So kind of looking at Bush, Obama, and Trump, kind of at high peak or high coverage immigration policy releases, looking at media coverage there, kind of looking at levels of anti-immigrant sentiment in the reporting, and then also kind of levels of quality of coverage. So the representation of like legal and factual information in the coverage of these policy changes. And then I'm going to be looking at levels of immigration applications in the United States. And that will kind of form the quantitative portion of my study. And then I'm also going to be conducting a qualitative portion, which is conducting focus groups with workers in like immigrants' rights organizations, because I myself was kind of a legal assistant and a coordinator at one of the organizations, and that's how I came up with this idea. But I think it'll be good to talk to other workers and see if they saw similar trends in what I saw, and then conduct interviews with immigrants. So it's going to be kind of widespread, but all within the US context in the past 15 to 20 years or so.
All right, thank you for that. You mentioned in the beginning that your research is largely informed by your professional career and what you've been doing before deciding to go into a PhD. That's why I thought I'd ask you, have you always been interested in migration-related issues, or has it come through sort of your work?
So yeah, no, I have a long history with immigration. I mean, I was born in Mexico myself, and we immigrated to the United States. So I think having an immigrant background probably piqued my interest without me fully realizing it during undergrad. When it came time to, I did my undergrad at Loyola University Chicago, and when it came time to choose internships, the first internship I did was at a refugee organization, and that has just kind of snowballed for the past decade or more now. So yeah, I've done internships at refugee organizations, asylum organizations, just general migrant rights organizations. When I graduated university, I worked for an immigration law firm. Then I did my master's, which focused on contributions to the refugee regime again. And then I went back to work for an immigrants rights organization in Chicago. So it's really been just kind of the focus of everything I've done. And it's something that I feel just kind of passionate about in general, being involved in kind of, yeah, just immigration at every level, like immigration law, research, community organizing, community activism. So yeah, I think it's very much informed by my past experience and academia. It's all been that.
And would you say, I hope it's not a really big question, but would you say you're hoping to go into academia afterwards, or do you want to take it back to professional sort of career?
Yeah, I entered this thinking I don't want to go into academia. I still think that's the case now, but I mean, it's something that I'm obviously open to exploring. But when I started this PhD, it was kind of the point for me in my career where I thought I wanted to advance, and it was either I became an immigration lawyer or found another avenue to kind of still contribute to that field without doing exactly the work that I was doing. And I decided I didn't want to be an immigration lawyer. Biggest respects to immigration lawyers. I don't know how they do it. It was like the most emotionally taxing years of my life. So then I thought, research is a way that I can contribute to the field without, being so sad all the time. So I think that I don't want to enter into academia. I think there's a bit of a disconnect between like academia and community activism and stuff like that when it comes to immigration, and I'm sure other fields. So I feel like hopefully being able to conduct research for government or think tanks or other organizations like that kind of marry academia and community organizing would be my ideal in between.
And you said you were at work while the Trump administration was in power. In a diplomatic way as possible. Was that a challenging time? Was that like a wild time?
Yeah, no need to be diplomatic. It was horrible. Yeah, it was. It was kind of crazy in that, I mean, I'm sure that there's always a lot of immigration policies and things like that affect people, but during the Trump administration, I remember sometimes it felt like there was policy and administrative changes on like a weekly basis. And he really targeted a lot of small things. Like it wasn't just like large things like building the wall. It was a lot of really small changes. Like an example I can just off the top of my head is there was this like application type for survivors of like certain crimes like domestic violence and things like that he was looking to cut. And he made it so that if you didn't fill out every single little box in the application that's like 20 plus pages, they could just reject the entire application. So it was just like small things like that were fairly relentless. And I think when we talk about immigration, it's so broad and things, but immigration law is like really such a specific field. And it's so, yeah, like all these little changes can make such a big difference that it felt at the time pretty relentless.
Okay, and you spoke earlier about some of the methods that you'll be using during the research, and you said you would be speaking to some immigrants. I was interested in how you would be going about that. Will you be using NGOs or organizations to speak to them? Will you be traveling back to the US to sit down for something, at length?
So that's kind of the portion of my project that I'm currently in and is hopefully going to take off. So I got ethics approval through King's, which was like a very nice process, but like quite lengthy because of course you're speaking to like immigrant populations, which are seen as vulnerable populations. So you get the large ethics application. But now that's approved, yeah, it would be going to the US. The organization that I worked at, the National Immigrant Justice Center, is like an immigrants' rights organization. I am in contact with them now, hopefully to be able to participate. And I would be targeting other organizations like that in different regions. I hope to talk to 3 organizations in 3 different regions in the US. And by talking to the organizations, I can talk to the workers that are obviously there and are dealing with these issues on the daily. And then I can also hopefully talk to their clients who are, at some point had to make the decision to apply or like not apply to certain things. So they're kind of people who, are aware of the immigration system and how it's working and might be involved in some form of application or not. And they would be semi-structured interviews, one-on-one with them, just really trying, fairly exploratory in the sense that I'm just really trying to gauge from them, like, what made you decide to apply to something, like why now? Where do you get your information about, immigration policies from, or like how certain things in the media might affect you, or what do you think about that? Just really trying to kind of get their point of view as to what mechanisms are behind them applying or not.
And just very quickly, before I hand back to Tomek there, are you speaking to the groups that are in transit through South America, or are you looking at people who are coming through all means, perhaps, from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, or elsewhere?
I mean, people through all means in the sense that I'm speaking to like immigrants who are already in the US, right? I'm not speaking to them at country of origin. It's people who are already residing in the US. So that can look like I suspect a lot of the population might be undocumented. They're undocumented at the moment, maybe they've just arrived and are wondering whether they should apply for asylum, or maybe they're wondering whether they should submit some sort of family application to see whether they think that's risky or not. It might be somebody who already has permanent residence who is trying to decide whether they want to apply to citizenship or not, or just various routes, or maybe even somebody who's there who's wondering whether they should petition for a family member to come over. But essentially, I'm speaking to the people who are in the US who are going to be the ones applying. It's called like making an affirmative application. So you're not like going through immigration courts defensively applying for things. You are actively engaging with the immigration system affirmatively.
Right. I was wondering, from what you're saying and from reading your abstract, obviously your research is very much focused on the US. I was wondering, how come you chose to come to King's and to the UK?
It was so I looked at a lot of universities when looking for the PhD. There was one big reason why I also looked at the UK in general, and it's the type of PhDs that are available. In the US, social science PhDs can take between like 5 to 7 years, whereas here they take 3 to 4 years. And as somebody going into this who actively knew I didn't want to enter into academia, I didn't want to have to do 2 to 3 more years of pure classes and then, 3 to 4 more years of then research. It's like a very involved, lengthy process that really tries to kind of set you on an academic pathway, I thought. And I really wanted to get stuck into the research. So then I thought something like this would be better. I also did my master's at Trinity College Dublin. So I think just knowing, there's all these other options and other ways of doing it, I started looking here and eventually found my supervisor, Jonathan Portes, who, is an economist and immigration expert, and also comes from a non-academic background. And it just seemed like a good fit. So I just flew on over.
You also talked about you starting on that sort of empirical side of your project now with getting ready to conduct interviews. Would you tell us how far along, if there's even a way to sort of pin it down, how far along the entire project you'd say you are?
This is very timely because I'm about to do my upgrade, so I've just had to do an entire timeline of my project. So it's all in my head. So I hope to conduct like the focus groups this spring because I can do that remotely over Teams or Zoom. Then I hope to conduct the interviews this summer. Hopefully, I suspect building relationships with organizations will take a while, and they're also very sensitive when it comes to client confidentiality. But hopefully by the summer, I'm able to conduct those interviews. And then next year, the focus would be the quantitative portion of my study. And then hopefully by next year I would be done with that and kind of be ready to enter that writing up period by the 4th year. I don't imagine I will finish this within the exact 3 years. That's incredibly difficult, but yeah.
And of the work that you've done so far, is there anything that has surprised you? So has it taken you in a different direction? Has it sort of confounded your expectations?
I mean, I suspected, obviously, when you enter this, you do a research proposal, so you have an idea of what's out there already. But I think I wasn't so aware that I was going to get so stuck into like the media effects literature of it all, since my focus has always been like immigration law, politics, and I've now found that a lot of my research focuses on, well, obviously, but media effects and how the media influences people's opinion, their decision making, their actions. I've like really that was a field that I hadn't really explored before the PhD, and now it's a field that I'm really stuck into. And then also just a lot of the research, again, within kind of media effects, really, when it comes to immigration, it focuses on the effects that media has on like native populations, so like residents of whatever origin country they're looking at. And there's not that much research on the effects it has on immigrants. So it's like, or there's also not a lot of interaction with immigrants to see, what's going on. So it's just kind of been interesting to me that there's so much research about immigration in the media, and like there's not that many pieces of research that have like asked immigrants what they think, essentially. So that's been it's something that I had already suspected, but when it's confirmed, you're just kind of like, that's, not great.
And how do you measure the impact media is having on people? Is there a way of quantifying that? Is it simple? Is it quite complicated? How do you go about that?
It's quite complicated, I think. The question of like attribution is something that like I'm really trying to grapple with right now. And I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm doing the qualitative study as well, because I don't think that my quantitative study would be able to decisively say like, oh yeah, just, higher levels of anti-immigrant sentiment have led to lower levels of applications. I think even that would be like too vague. It's very difficult. I mean, the way that I'm trying to do it now, just because of data availability, would be to kind of look at regional coverage and then regional application numbers. Because when it comes to application data with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, thus far it's been very difficult to get anything from them. And I suspect that the only thing that I'll be able to get is kind of regional information. So it'll just be comparing across regions. And that's kind of the way that I hope to do it quantitatively, and then hopefully do those regional focus groups and interviews and really support the quantitative results through qualitative means.
When we spoke to Bill and Nick for the earlier episodes, I sort of asked them if there was a point they'd like to get to or an end goal for their research. And I think that they both sort of alluded to adding to the existing literature was among their goals. Do you see there being like an endpoint for your work or a place you'd like it to get to? Is it like the formation of a policy idea? Where do you see that, if at all?
Obviously, contributing to the literature is great. And there's also like growing literature on kind of media effects and like the quality of it. But beyond that, it's not something that I've thought about enough, but it's a question that I think is so important that I would want the information to be distributed in some sense, even if it's just like a joint report through one of the organizations that I'm working with for this study or something like that. I would personally like it to go beyond academia. How to do that is the question, but I think the hope in research like this is for it to go beyond academic knowledge to like just public knowledge. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do, but I think the work that I want to do is geared towards policymaking. And so, hopefully in the next year or so, I'll try to figure that one out.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think we will call it to a halt for part one there. We'll take a quick break and join us again in a moment for the second half.
In this part of the podcast, we'll be talking about the practicalities of applying for a PhD course at the School of Politics and Economics, as well as about the different degrees that are on offer. We have joining us Dr. Jonathan Leader Maynard, who is a Deputy PhD Coordinator for the Department of Political Economy. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for being with us. So the first thing that we would definitely like to know is what are the programs that are available in the department, and what is special about doing research there?
So we have 4 programs at the doctoral level. All of those are called MPhil PhD programs, MPhil/PhD. So technically, when you start the doctoral program, you're an MPhil student, and then you get upgraded via a process called the upgrade after 18 months of, or a maximum of 18 months of doing the degree. So it's a full-time PhD, but you start with this kind of MPhil status. So all 4 are called that. And we have 4. There are 3 programs that are somewhat similar: political economy research, politics research, and public policy research. To be honest, all of them are pretty similar. There's not really any great difference between the structures of those programs. It's mainly about the frame and who you're expected to kind of coordinate with within the department. Politics research is kind of fairly expansive, covers everything. Certainly you get more people doing maybe qualitative political science and political theory doing that. Political economy is all the kind of economics and political economy stuff. And then public policy is for those obviously with a more kind of practitioner focused or government focused or NGO focused kind of project. But it's not hugely important which of those you would apply for. And I would encourage people not to worry about it too much. There is a 4th program we run called the Politics and Contemporary History MPhil and PhD. That is a little bit different. It's associated with part of the department that does specialist work on British politics and British political history. It's run by a slightly different group within the department than the other 3, all of which I and the main PhD director help run. So that does have a slightly different focus, but those are the 4 programs that we run. And then you asked what's special about doing the research in the School of Politics and Economics. I would say that one of the most important things about us, and this is somewhat true of King's more generally, is how extensively interdisciplinary we are. So the Department of Political Economy itself is really an amalgam of a wide range of different disciplines. So you've got kind of people who do political theory here, you've got people who do qualitative political science, you've got people who do quantitative political science, people who do economics in the same department. And within the economics people, you have those who do something kind of like a more qualitative, historically informed political economy, and then those who do more conventional quantitative economics as well. So it's one of the most diverse kind of departments of its kind around. And then that's not even getting on board to the other part of the School of Politics and Economics, which is the European International Studies department. That's not my department. They also run an MPhil PhD program in international political economy, and you've got all the people who do kind of international studies within that department as well. So within the school, it's this huge cluster of research, about 100 permanent faculty. So we're both large, we're very diverse. And I would also say that on top of that, we are a department. There are many departments around the UK and around the world who have very much a kind of agenda, an identity about the way that they do, say, politics research, or say they do economics research, the Chicago School of Economics or International Relations or something like that. And we're not very like that. Beyond the emphasis on interdisciplinarity, we have a wide range of different approaches here. We have people doing everything from kind of very sort of statistical positivist economics or political science research right the way through to people doing critical post-colonial intellectual history kind of approaches. We don't have a fixed agenda about the kind of output that the department is creating. So I'd say the combination of those 2 things, this kind of interdisciplinary and not very agenda-led approach, and then the kind of sheer size. I mean, and when I say, we're big, the Department of Political Economy and European International Studies together in the school. There's also the Russia Institute, which is part of our school as well. But then we're only one bit of the kind of overall politics research community at King's, which also includes things like war studies, the Department of International Development. So we obviously benefit by links with those departments as well. So, and indeed, King's is in fact the single largest research cluster in Europe now, I think in Europe, certainly in the UK. So yeah, all of these things combine to make it a pretty special research environment.
I was also wondering, What would you say are the most popular disciplines among our doctoral students? Are there any especially strong ones in the department?
I would say that historically, because of the department's kind of unique status as a department of political economy, when founded, this was the only department of political economy in the country. There aren't many rivals in that sense, in terms of its identity and positioning, nationally or internationally. A lot of our research community, our PhD community, has been doing stuff that very much does sit on that boundary between politics and economics, or conventionally as would be understood, political economy. So we have a bunch of stuff that's sort of economics, but with a focus on the political context in which economic decision making and economic phenomena occur. We also have quite a strong tradition of people doing something in kind of the history of economic thought, or sort of ideologies and political philosophies within which the relationship between politics and economics is kind of central. I think if we had a traditional expertise or strength, I would say that those were the kind of couple of areas that would traditionally have been very strong. But now the department's grown incredibly rapidly. You know, this department was founded 13 years ago with 8 permanent faculty. Now it has 70 permanent faculty, and roughly the same amount of PhD students, about 70 PhD students as well. So things, you know, the last kind of 3 or 4 years have changed quite a lot. I mean, we've seen quite a few students coming in, expanding our political theory group now. So political theory research cluster within the department is one of the most sort of active. Quantitative political economy is now a very active segment within the department. We have a few more people than we used to. You know, the department didn't used to have any real specialism in kind of international politics, not within Department of Political Economy. European International Studies had people who did that. Now that's spread out a bit more between the two departments within the School of Politics and Economics. So we have a larger group of people now doing more international stuff, things post-colonial theory, post-colonial studies within the international or within political thought. These are big areas that we have stuff going on. And I think also the other thing that's sort of been developed over time is more of a public policy angle now as well, where we have more people doing policy relevant or policy focused research. That's been a big area of growth as well. But I would sort of emphasize, I don't think that this is a department that I would sort of identify as having one particular known specialism. I think if anything, if there is a specialism here, it is the interdisciplinarity and the integration across different approaches and different traditional paradigms, and the desire to kind of break those conventional ways of dividing up disciplines that I would say is particularly characteristic. And yeah, so you know, in a sense, we have people doing all sorts of different kinds of politics and economics and international studies research.
Now I want to know about some of the career prospects that lay ahead of the doctoral graduates. Maybe you have some examples in mind. What have people gone on to do after they've completed their PhDs?
So one thing to say here is that perhaps to a greater extent than many departments, as I sort of just intimated in my previous question, we have quite a strong split between roughly half of our PhD students doing kind of full-time PhDs and roughly half of them doing part-time PhDs. And there's usually quite a different profile of people and the kind of career prospects and where they want to take the PhD between those two groups. So the part-time, not always, but many of the part-time PhD students here tend to be later in their careers. They're kind of doing a project that either supports their existing career plans or is a private interest that they have in doing a particular piece of research. That can be in a whole range of different areas. Often people who have been, we have quite a few people who have been involved in law and are doing a PhD project as a kind of complement to law, maybe considering a more political dimension of the law or the law of a certain area of economic activity or something like that. And they want to do it with a more, not just from a legal perspective, but bringing in politics and economics into their perspectives as well. So the part-time students, there's quite a wide array of like areas that how the PhD fits into their careers and what they then go on to do. Amongst the more full-time PhD students, I would say that the majority do see their project as at least potentially leading on to a career in academia. And that's something that we're having a growing rate now of, I mean, again, so many of our PhD students have only joined in the last 5 years, right? So to some extent, it's to be seen like where people end up going. But certainly a lot of people would see academia as being the potential future route. And we even have a couple of people who have come through the department, PhD, and then they've done a postdoc in the department, and then they've gone off to do academia somewhere else. So academia is one route. But the obvious other routes would be things like government, international organizations, with quite a large proportion of international students coming here to do PhDs who then go back to work with either NGOs or government organizations in their home country. Then some people who go into business or go into kind of corporate, private sector, third sector adjacent kind of stuff. So really, again, I would say that as a department, we don't have a particular kind of route planned out for people. Anyone doing a PhD should think very hard. I mean, it's a huge amount of investment. Should think hard about where they're going with it. But a lot of people do it to do academia, and I think that's great. I'm an academic. I love it. I think it's one of the best jobs in the world. But it is incredibly difficult these days. There's just so many excellent candidates and not enough jobs for all the people who would be excellent academics. So it's important, I think, for those that are keen on academia to think about where else they might go with it. And in that respect, as I say, our department is quite good because we have this very diverse range of outcomes that people tend to take their PhDs into.
I was also wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the sort of practicalities of the application process. For example, where does one start to think about a research proposal? What are the first steps sort of to get it started?
The first place to start, fairly obviously, is going on the PhD pages on the department's website, which gives some guidance on this, although, obviously the guidance is quite generic because we have everyone coming, for people from all sorts of different backgrounds, considering all four of the different programs that we offer in DPE, and then you've got European International Studies as well, and the King's Russia Institute. So there's some guidance on the pages there. I think the two main things I would say to people about when they start to think about a research proposal beyond that fairly generic advice is, first of all, ideally, and increasingly people place big emphasis on this within academic research, research should be puzzle orientated, right? I think there's a lot of people who are like, I'd love to work on this topic, right? But you can say almost anything about a topic, right? And indeed, many topics we already know a huge amount about, and actually it's not clear that we need a huge amount more funded research on such and such a topic. Better to think about, what do we not know? What puzzles us? What is the mystery? What confuses us? That the social world, very much like the physical universe, is full of mysteries, right? Things that we would love to know more about, but that we don't fully understand. And so I would always encourage people thinking about doctoral research to what's the puzzle, what's the mystery that you're interested in trying to understand or contribute to our understanding of. That's often the best way, I think, of thinking about research in a very purposive way. And then the second thing to think about is, okay, what's a realistic, feasible way that I, the specific person that I am considering applying for this PhD program, what's the most feasible, realistic way that I could go about addressing that puzzle and investigating the kind of questions that interest me? If there's a fundamental problem that we get with many applicants to us that are not successful, it's that either the puzzle is not well enough defined, like what they want to investigate, or there's just not enough detail about how actually they would realistically go about investigating the puzzle. Or maybe there is detail, but it's completely unrealistic that someone could do that much research in the kind of 3-year, 4-year time horizon that an MPhil PhD program is. So those are often the two first questions to kind of ask yourself. In thinking about those questions, it's very important to kind of engage with them by looking at where existing research is. Although it can be hard to access some research, more research than ever before now is publicly available, not necessarily behind paywalls, not necessarily requiring subscriptions. Even if you can't get the actual full article from journals, maybe the journals do require you to have library access or something like that. Some people have that already, some people don't. You can get abstracts, you can get information, you can get lists of articles from journals and what was on in special issues and things like that. So it's important, I think, to start, often it just means going on Google Scholar and doing a bit of time word searching, right? Like looking around to try and find what the existing profile of research out there is, and thinking kind of how the puzzle and what one might be interested in doing fits in to that existing research. So that's what I would say to people about the proposal. The one other thing I think I raise at this point as well, when people are thinking about the proposal, is to also start thinking about who they might have supervising the research. I'm a big believer that people should not apply to institutions because of institutions, not primarily. They should apply to institutions because there are the right people there for them to work with in doing the research that they want to do. And that means that you should go through the kind of different possible departments where you might do a PhD. Again, here we're talking about within the School of Politics and Economics, but there are many others at King's as well. and going through their staff pages, looking for what people work on, what are they doing at the moment, what projects are going on in this department, how might these people look like as potential supervisors for the project. Everyone who comes and does a PhD, certainly in Department of Political Economy, I think in European International Studies as well, everyone will have a primary supervisor and a secondary supervisor. So they need to be two people. And yeah, getting that choice right is an important part of the application process. You obviously can't necessarily guarantee that these people are going to be available, but ideally we want people to nominate in their application some potential names of people that they could work with within the departments they're applying to do the project.
You also mentioned quite rightly that it's quite a lot of investment in doing a PhD, and I think that applies both to time and money. Hence my question, what are some funding opportunities that are available for doctoral candidates in the departments?
So this is a lot more, unfortunately, complicated than it used to be. Back in the day, maybe 15 years ago, for example, departments basically got pots of money and they could allocate it kind of as they saw fit. I mean, not quite, but to applicants. Now the system is more complicated. There are different sources of funding, and they kind of come from different channels and avenues, and there are different eligibility rules about who can get them. The main source of funding for certainly domestic students and certain kinds of international students at King's comes through something called the LIS-DTP, the London Interdisciplinary Social Sciences Doctoral Training Partnership, a huge mouthful, which is an association between King's and a couple of other universities that provides funding for PhDs at the different institutions that make it up. The best thing people to do really there, I don't want to go into too much detail about the minutiae of how applying for that works, but there is quite a lot of detail about that on the KCL funding pages. So people can find more information about that there. It's slightly different if you're a domestic and an international student, and you can apply as part of the application process, but then you can also apply once you're here. And people can reapply. The funding is very competitive. I mean, I don't even really like the word competitive here. It's just that there's too many people and not as much funding as people want. So chances really vary. But that's the kind of main and standard channel through which you can go through. There are then some other specific funding schemes. So there's some funding tied to China. There's some funding tied to future leadership schemes in sub-Saharan Africa. There are a few other particular pots of money with eligibility rules for particular kinds of candidates. And then we also have a lot of candidates who come to us having secured funding from research funding institutions in their home country if they're international. So you might be a particular fund, say, in Japan, or a particular fund in Germany, or a particular fund in Mexico, that you then get funding to take with you to do research at another institution. And we have a number of people who come to King's to do that with us. There are other bits and pieces that I won't go into. Again, the best thing for people to do here is to go to the funding pages on King's and look through them pretty thoroughly. Again, there's quite a lot of different sections. Make sure, I would say to all candidates, that you do look at the LIS-DTP section, which has its own page under the funding pages, and that will give more information there. It is a perennial problem for us, and indeed for pretty much all UK institutions. We're not like some big American institutions that have very small PhD programs, all of which they fund. We, like most European universities, have big PhD programs, only some of which we're able to fund. But there are a range of different possibilities that people can look at. And also, as I say, once you're here, there are also some individual schemes, usually not for full funding, but for smaller amounts of funding that you can apply to particular kind of scholarships or studentships, which will help you. The one final thing I'll mention on funding is that some PhD students or some potential PhD students don't know that there are also sometimes specific bits of funding attached to particular grants that academics have got that offer basically a few PhD positions on a particular project that an existing staff member is working on. So there are kind of positives and negatives to that. You don't get quite as much control over the kind of project that you'd be doing if you get that kind of funding. But if there is a match between, say, a big grant that someone has at one of these universities and the project that you want to do, then maybe that might be a very, very effective source of funding for you. Those kind of opportunities tend to be advertised on jobs.ac.uk, the actual jobs page for UK academics. So if you go through there, most of the things on jobs.ac.uk, there's a kind of filter you can go down, you go to politics, under jobs.ac.uk. And most of the things listed there will be actual jobs for people after their PhD in academia, but they will also advertise, usually these things are called PhD studentships. And if you go through there, you can often see specific kinds of calls at particular universities for funding. So that's one other option that can sometimes be made available.
Great. That sounds like there's quite a lot of different options that also perhaps people who just look on the funding pages wouldn't find, like the thing that you just mentioned about the jobs portal. I didn't hear about that before, so that's definitely very, very useful. As has the entire chat been. It's definitely really good to hear a step by step approach on the applications, and also so much detail on why people should definitely consider doing research at that department. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for coming to the podcast and spending the time to talk to us. And now we're off to the second part. Thank you.
And welcome back to the second part of the Call My Supervisor podcast. In the first half, we looked at Marypaz's research and got her opinions and insights into that. And for the second half, we're going to be looking at the PhD experience itself. So to kick us off, I'll hand over to Tomek.
So Marypaz, why don't you tell us about what attracted you specifically to do a PhD? You mentioned there was a lot about your career and your professional experience, but surely there was something maybe more specific that, geared you towards that academic path in the end.
Yeah, I think a few different things. I think one of them, which I believe a lot of people in the office have, but both my parents did a PhD. And I think that when that happens, it's very much in your mind that this is like a possibility, or a path that you can take. So I think just in that sense, you have that level of understanding kind of what's out there and what you can do. So I think that made it easier for my mind to kind of think about doing a PhD maybe. But then also, yeah, I think, I've kind of mentioned, like, I've been in the immigration field for a while. And when looking at different career paths, I mean, the idea of becoming an expert in the field and somebody who can contribute like constructively to things, whatever job it is that I take afterwards, to think that, I can be a voice of influence, or like somebody that knows what, knows what they're doing, essentially. I know that sounds a bit, but yeah, I think that's one of the things that kind of attracted me the most. In whatever job I take from here on out, I kind of have the tools and the expertise to contribute, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to hear as well, sort of the as Daniel mentioned before, previous guests that were maybe more geared on staying in academia, and then yourself coming from more of the professional background. I think it's really interesting how different people hope to take something else out of the PhD experience, but at the end of the day, it is beneficial for either of the career paths, it seems. And so now off to the second question. What is sort of different in the process to your expectations? What did you expect, and how is the real life sort of differ from that?
I think one of the first things I realized when I started this, like, I really thought I was like, okay, I've done my research. This is a PhD. Like, I know what I'm doing. This is great. And then I entered the PhD and I was like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what a PhD is. I don't know what academia is. It's just realizing there's so much that you just don't know about. And I felt pretty like lost at the beginning. I mean, it's such like a behemoth of a project that you have to take on, and it is your individual project. And of course you have your supervisors, but where to start on like a 4-year project is such a difficult thing to do when there's just like a sea of things out there that you actually need to do by the end of this. So yeah, I think I just started out thinking like I would kind of know where to go and where to start and how to do it, and then just realizing I had no idea what I was doing or where to start, or how, the upper echelons of academia works. I was like, I don't know what's happening. So I think that took like a few months. And thankfully, I remember being really stressed out at the beginning of like, I really need to like start. I need to like do something, accomplish something. And I remember my supervisor being like pretty blasé, just being like, it's fine. Just like, just get situated, get comfortable. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm like doing a PhD, I can't get comfortable. But actually you do need that time to really figure it out.
You mentioned earlier there your parents. Are you from a family of social scientists? Is that the hot topic around the dinner table?
No, I'm from a family of actual scientists. The opposite. My dad is an agricultural engineer and my mom is a molecular biologist. And I'm always like, I'm also a political scientist. Maybe not the same. Yeah.
That is a heavyweight Christmas quiz, no?
Yeah. Sometimes when I watch University Challenge, I like hear words that I recognize and I'm like, I know what an amino acid is, but I actually don't know. I never get them right.
So you spoke briefly there about the challenges of the early days of your PhD. Mm-hmm. So what was it that really helped you? Is it like a thing, a person, or like a resource that sort of clarified it for you?
I started coming into the office a lot more. I remember at the beginning, I would kind of come into the office and like try to do some work. But again, I didn't really know what it was just me trying to kind of read articles, which even though is what you're supposed to do, it doesn't feel that productive, but it is. But I started coming into the office a lot more. And as soon as you start talking to other PhD students, you feel like you're not alone. Everybody's kind of confused. And then obviously you're meeting PhD students from second year, third year, writing up, and they're all there telling you that that's completely fine. They help you figure things out. Coming into the office regularly, I think, has been my PhD salvation in trying to figure things out and kind of build a community.
Were you able to draw on some other people's research? Are there other people in the office that sort of study migration-related issues?
There's not a lot of people in the office. Well, there's actually no one I know who focuses on immigration specifically. I think there are in like other departments, I'm sure like geography and things like that focus more so on immigration. In DPE, not that I've met. There are, however, I feel like where I've connected with people is when you talk about like different methodologies, because there's definitely people doing like stuff on media effects, or there's definitely people doing qualitative stuff, or I feel like that's where I've been able to like really bond, which is kind of where I needed to anyway. I obviously don't know everything about immigration, but like I've been in it for a while and both my supervisors are like immigration experts, both through economy and law. So I feel like I've got the immigration part kind of covered on that end. But I think even if you don't share the exact same topic, you can kind of still bond over different research methods, which sounds nerdy, but.
No, that's fair. I can imagine it's quite helpful to see that other people have a similar approach, or perhaps a different one from which you can get inspiration as well.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, you mentioned before that one challenge would be sort of deciding where to start on such a vast project. What would you say are some other challenges that you encountered sort of later on?
I think I mentioned this earlier, but I mean, you start building this whole research design and then you kind of maybe realize that you're not going to be able to obtain like all the data for it or all the information for it. And that's going to change your research design definitely. So far, like I've had a hard time. I mean, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the US government for some of the application information, and they've been like kind of ignoring me. So like I've been able to pull data, pre-existing public information that they have, but I definitely need more. So like, and I think this is something that other people in the office have sort of experienced, where you kind of, you think you're going to be able to get this, and hopefully I will, but it'll either take a long time or actually you're going to need to like pivot a little bit and change your design, a year or two in. And that's fairly common. I think almost all the PhD students that you'll talk to, like their end result or like their end research design is not what they thought it was going to be at the beginning. But it might be a hard pill to swallow at some point.
So if you could meet day one Marypaz of your PhD, what advice would you give her?
I would tell her that she doesn't need to panic about the fact that she hasn't written a PhD within 1 week of her arriving. I would tell her that everyone who's telling her that it's okay they're right. I am now the person telling people that it's okay and to just like settle in and kind of not take it easy, but just not freak out that you're not accomplishing a million things right away. So I think that would probably be the biggest thing. And maybe the other thing would just be to like get involved kind of in different things in university. I kind of did that last year, but I've done that a lot more this year, and I've really enjoyed this year, like this academic year so far. So I think just finding like other interesting jobs or opportunities or just things like that have like made this experience a lot better for me this year, I think.
Okay, and what about for someone who's doing an MA and is toying with the idea of doing something doctoral? What advice would you give them? Maybe specific, maybe general.
This is also very timely because I was just in a panel on 2 days ago for master's students who were thinking about doing PhDs. And one of a few questions they asked were kind of like, do I need a PhD for, X, Y, Z? And I think a lot of times you might not, right? So I think you really need to think about what path you want to take. If you're an MA student and you want to maybe test out the waters and work for a bit, then you can go into PhD. You might test out the waters, realize you don't need a PhD. So I think when it comes to doing a PhD, it's really looking kind of introspectively and thinking, is this what I need right now? Or am I just doing it for the degree and the title and because I think that I need a PhD? Because unless you're like dead set on being a university professor, even then you don't like 100% need a PhD. You know what I mean? You're doing a PhD because you feel really passionate about this and you really think it's what you want to do. So I think just having a really good think about it.
I would just add a quick question about sort of finding funding opportunities. How did you sort of approach that? I was at the panel that you mentioned, and I remember that was also one of quite a hot topic because it's quite a time and money investment. So I think perhaps prospective students would be interested to know.
So I'm a self-funded student, which is not great. But I think when I was thinking of programs and what I wanted to do, it was like, do I want to be less poor for 7 years or more poor for 3 years? I know that sounds silly, but I kind of made my choice. And it's been years of savings that have helped for tuition, family help, and loans. And then for living expenses, for me, it's been working. Like right now, I work as a parliamentary researcher for the House of Lords, and I've been doing a lot of research assistant work for the Policy Institute and taking random gigs. And I've really just, last year I was able to write a report with my supervisor, and I also did a lot of, random work like invigilation and student ambassador and like everything. So I think if you're able to secure funding, that's obviously better, in that you don't have to channel so much energy into making money for your living expenses. But it is also incredibly difficult, especially as an international student, and especially now that everybody who is outside the UK is an international student, right? Competition is really high for these funding opportunities, but they are out there. And I think again, just looking at what is best for you.
And the PhD community itself, so the people you work with, who you run into in the office, the people in the WhatsApp groups and whatnot, what is that like for someone who's perhaps thinking about going into it?
I've gotten incredibly lucky in the fact that I kind of randomly chose an office, and those have become kind of my best friends here. But yeah, it's really nice. And I feel like a nice thing about this department in general, we all have lunch together at 1 p.m. every day on the 9th floor. So that's something that's just out there always for anybody who wants to, join. There are the WhatsApp groups, we go to the pub probably more often than we should. So there is the opportunity kind of for community there. And I think going into the office often and kind of getting yourself involved it's like I said, it's been so helpful for me, and I know everybody that's there. So it's something that I recommend a lot. But it's been really lovely. I think, a lot of times you hear that PhDs can be very lonely in general because it is such like a lonely project technically. But I've been really lucky to not really feel that lonely because I have that community.
You mentioned the House of Lords there. What's that like, rubbing shoulders with the good and the great, should we say?
Yeah. Well, as an American, it's actually been crazy for me because I come from the Midwest of America. We're pretty far from DC. My closest interaction with government has been like Chicago's city council. And then I came here and I applied for this internship through the Policy Institute to work for a lord or a baroness. I work for Baroness Shami Chakrabarti. And she used to be former shadow attorney for the UK and has done all these great things. And it's been, such a great experience. I think like a month or two ago, I was just like in a meeting in Westminster and I was just looking out the window and there was Big Ben and it was like a very out of world experience for me. But it's been really, really great so far.
And Baroness Chakrabarti, I think before she entered the Lords, she did a lot of work with the migration NGO, did she? That's very useful for you, I imagine.
Yeah, she started out as a human rights lawyer, and then I believe she worked for the Home Office, and then she was the director of Liberty, which is a human rights organization. So yeah, they kind of paired us up. I was really lucky in that I got paired with somebody who does exactly what I want to do, and she's been great. Just kind of like a boss and a mentor and everything like that. So I've been able to do stuff with Westminster, helping her with like a radio shows in the BBC and like helping her write a book on human rights. And like it's a really cool program that King's has.
And your advice would kind of be like apply for all the opportunities that are out there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, like largely for money is why I started applying for everything, but then it's just helped my life in general. But I remember I started out and I was just on King's Talent Bank applying to everything and anything. And it's gotten me in a really good position. So I really suggest that whether you need the money or not, because you get great experiences from it.
Outstanding. Okay, and that brings an end to today's episode. I'd like to thank my co-host for today, Tomek, for his support, and I'd like to thank, of course, Marypaz for sharing her thoughts and insights for this episode. And of course, thanks to you, our listeners, for taking the time to tune in, and we look forward to welcoming you again for our next episode. Take care